Sarah watches her mother struggle with money her entire childhood, swears she will never make the same mistakes, gets her first real job at 24, starts earning decent money, and within 3 years, she is making almost every financial decision her mother made. Different income, different era, same exact pattern. And here is what makes that so strange. Sarah is smart. Sarah reads about money. Sarah genuinely wants to do better. But wanting to do better and actually doing better are two completely different things when the mistake is not about knowledge. It is about something that runs so much deeper than knowledge that most people never even see it happening. Every generation believes they figured out what the previous generation got wrong. Boomers watched their parents hoard cash under mattresses and swore they would trust the system. Millennials watched boomers lose everything in 2008 and swore they would never be that exposed. Gen Z watched millennials drown in student debt and swore they would never take on that kind of liability. Each generation diagnoses the last one correctly, and then, quietly, almost invisibly, develops their own version of the exact same underlying mistake, wearing completely different clothes. The mistake is not overspending. It is not undersaving. It is not bad investments or wrong timing or poor financial literacy. Those are symptoms. The actual mistake, the one that has repeated itself across every generation in recorded economic history, is this. People optimize for the financial rules of the world they grew up in, not the world they are actually living in. And by the time they realize the rules changed, they have already made 10 years of decisions based on the old ones. Picture this. It's 1975. Robert is 28 years old. He watched his parents nearly lose everything during the Great Depression. Their lesson was simple. Cash is king. Never trust banks. Never trust the stock market. Keep your wealth somewhere you can physically touch it. Robert internalized that lesson completely. So, Robert keeps most of his money in cash, in physical saving spots, in the house he owns outright. He feels safe. He feels smart. He feels like he learned from history. What Robert does not feel is inflation eating 7% of his cash savings every single year. What Robert does not see is the S&P 500 compounding at 12% annually through the 70s and 80s, while his money sits still. Robert did not make his parents' mistake. He made his own version of it. He overcorrected so hard in one direction that he walked straight into a different wall. Now, move forward to 1999. Robert's son, Daniel, is 28. He watched his father refuse to invest in anything and die without the retirement he deserved. Daniel's lesson was equally clear. You have to be in the market. Growth assets, real estate. Never let money sit idle. Daniel buys a house, maxes out his 401k, takes on a home equity line of credit to invest in more real estate because property always goes up. He feels aggressive. He feels modern. He feels like he corrected his father's mistake. Then 2008 arrives. Daniel loses 40% of his portfolio, his home value craters below what he owes, and the home equity line becomes a trap he spends 6 years climbing out of. Daniel did not make his father's mistake. He made the opposite one, and the result was nearly identical. This is not bad luck. This is not stupidity. This is a pattern so consistent across generations that economists have a name for it. Recency bias compounded by generational trauma. Your brain assigns enormous weight to the financial pain you witnessed growing up. It builds rules around that pain. And those rules feel like wisdom because they're based on real events that really hurt real people. The problem is the rules are always fighting the last war. The financial battlefield shifts. The rules stay the same. And the gap between the rules you carry and the reality you are living in is exactly where wealth quietly gets destroyed. Here's where it gets personal. Think about the financial beliefs you hold most strongly right now. The ones that feel like common sense. The ones you would defend in an argument. There's an almost perfect chance that each of those beliefs is a direct response to something you watched fail when you were between the ages of 8 and 22. That window, childhood to early adulthood, is when your financial identity forms. It's when you absorb the rules, and the rules you absorb feel universal because you have no other frame of reference. But they are not universal. They are biographical. They belong to the specific economic moment you happen to grow up in. People who grew up in the 70s and 80s during high inflation built a deep belief that debt is dangerous and cash loses value. That belief was completely correct for that era. In the low inflation 90s and 2000s, it caused them to miss enormous wealth building opportunities by avoiding leverage and staying too conservative. People who grew up in the 90s during the greatest bull market in history built a deep belief that the market always recovers and time in the market beats everything. That belief is broadly true, but it led an entire generation to ignore risk concentration, ignore valuation, and ignore the difference between a market that recovers in 2 years and one that takes 15. People who grew up watching the 2008 crash built a distrust of banks, mortgages, and financial institutions. That distrust is understandable, but it is leading many of them to avoid wealth-building tools like real estate leverage and institutional investing at exactly the moment those tools are most accessible to them. None of these people are making random mistakes. They are all making the same coherent mistake. They're playing by rules that were correct once in a different game, on a different board. And the market doesn't grade you on effort or intention. It grades you on outcomes. Robert's cash discipline would have been genius in 1935. It was expensive in 1975. Daniel's growth mindset would have been brilliant in 2003. It was catastrophic in 2008. The wisdom is real. The timing is everything, and almost nobody teaches you how to tell the difference. So what actually breaks the pattern? Because knowing about it is not enough. Daniel knew his father made mistakes. Sarah knew her mother made mistakes. Knowing is the beginning of the conversation, not the end. What actually breaks it is developing what researchers at the University of Chicago call financial time awareness, the ability to distinguish between principles that are permanently true and rules that are era-specific. Compound growth is permanently true. It works in every era, every economy, every market cycle. Avoid all debt is era-specific. It was correct wisdom in a deflationary depression. It's expensive advice in a moderate inflation environment with accessible low-interest leverage. Spend less than you earn is permanently true. Cash is the safest place for money is era-specific. It was true before FDIC insurance, before diversified index funds, before inflation became the dominant long-term risk to savings. The exercise is uncomfortable, but it is the most valuable financial audit you will ever do. Write down your 5 strongest money beliefs, the ones you wouldn't even question. Then ask yourself one thing about each of them. Where did this come from? Not why is it true, where did it come from? Because if the answer is, I watched someone get hurt by the opposite of this when I was young, you're holding a scar, not a strategy. And scars are important. They tell you where you've been. They're terrible navigation tools for where you are going. The generation that will build the most wealth in the next 20 years will not be the one that works the hardest or earns the most. It will be the one that figures out fastest which of their inherited financial beliefs are permanently true and which ones belong to a world that no longer exists. Because the mistake is not going away. Every generation will make it. The only question is how long it takes you to see it in yourself. And the ones who see it earliest, the ones who can look at their own financial instincts with honest curiosity instead of defensive certainty, those are the ones who stop repeating history and start building something the next generation actually wants to copy.